Hello and welcome to Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business, brought to you by MegaPixx Media. Joining me today is Sheila Botting, who is President of Professional Services for the Americas, and Craig Leibowitz, who is Executive Director for Innovation and Insights with Avison Young. Thanks, both of you, for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Mario.
Let me just start by asking you, you have recently released the Vitality Index, which measures the pace of return to downtowns. Maybe first explain exactly what the Vitality Index is and how you did it, I guess.
Sure. So in our roles, we deliver data-driven solutions for our clients. And between Sheila and myself, we must have had close to 4-digit number of client discussions post-COVID about this very subject matter, which is who's returning to work, how are they returning to work, how are they navigating an environment with no precedent. So we have an exceptional relationship with a third party called Orbital Insight, and Orbital Insight takes cell phone data, anonymizes it, and extrapolates it to represent foot traffic or visitor volumes across different areas of interest that my team isolated across different geographies and different industries within those geographies to measure those return to work efforts. Okay. So we take all the mystery away from the who and the what, and now it's up to us to determine the why.
So let me just ask, in terms of a specific, like how many cities were measured in this?
We have 23 cities across North America.
Okay, super. Tell me the why. Maybe Sheila, you can answer that question. Why is it important to have this data?
Sure. So as you can imagine, with COVID, represented the largest event in the globe, especially for downtown offices. Suddenly people stayed home, worked remotely, and we wanted to measure what did that look like. What was that cliff looking like, so to speak. And then more importantly, as people were contemplating return to the office, many employers, in fact, are thinking about, do I return Labor Day? Is that the natural time? That's what everybody talked about. Well, Craig and his team, chose to look at that opportunity and say, which markets are ahead of others? More importantly for our clients, whether they be a business owner who's contemplating return to work, do we return to work after Labor Day? Is that something we want all of our employees to do? Or is it October or November or December? What's everybody else doing in the world? How do I fit? And then the flip side of that is for the investors in the buildings. When are people coming back? How do I scale up my property management platforms? And then, of course, for local municipal government and or infrastructure, call it, commuter trains or, transportation. How do we manage our whole network to make sure we're ready to accommodate this return to office, so to speak? And then, of course, the small businesses in the downtowns, which have absolutely been challenged through this whole pandemic. How do we make sure that we've got a path forward for those businesses? So there's many different angles to consider. And so for us to be able to put some transparency around that becomes part of the solution.
Now, tell me if I'm reading this information right. From what I saw there, it showed that there has been an 83.6% drop since March 2nd, I think it was 2020, in the average weekday visitor volume. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. How and what is the range, as in all those cities, what is the range in terms of the drop in that period of time?
So at the very top of the list, you have Edmonton at a drop of 66%. And at the very bottom of the list, you have Ottawa at about 92% below those immediate pre-COVID levels.
Okay. Two Canadian cities, bookending either side of our 23 locations across North America. That's saying a lot.
And I see Calgary was minus 69.8%. Okay. When you look at the data, like what did you find interesting about it, and what was key for you? Some of the key insights that you gained from it.
So for me, what we start to find is that there are three variables that are influencing those varying return to work efforts or lack thereof in some circumstances.
Mhm.
And they include one, the infection rates and vaccination rates that are informing governmental regulations, which every municipality has a different levels of restrictions there. The second is the industry composition of those cities that informs those return to work efforts. So at one end of the spectrum, you have construction and real estate that is largely or more so back in the office compared with the tech, which has adopted remote work strategies. The third is employees' reliance on mass transit systems, which serves as a hurdle for those return to work efforts in cities like New York City, where I sit.
Okay. And Sheila, I'm just curious, everything changes these days with this COVID beast upon us, right? And here in Alberta, we're into the fourth wave big time, and I read the news headlines in the States, the same thing. Do you foresee doing this index again at another time? Because of the rapid changes that we're seeing in the environment.
So Craig, maybe you want to answer that, because I think this is a daily index that we're monitoring nonstop.
Yeah.
Yeah, the data refreshes daily, and there are a lot of different ways to peel this onion. We could look at the same data on an hourly basis and a daily basis as well. So this has some applicability for example, retail recoveries during the holiday season as one different lens through which to interpret this critical data.
Okay, super. Last question I have for Sheila, just wondering if there's anything about the index that I didn't ask you about that you wanted to mention, or something that you wanted to highlight.
Sure. So there's probably 20 of those things, Mario. I could talk forever about that, but some of the things, and maybe Craig and I will do a bit of a tag team. If you think about similar Canadian and US cities, so think about Calgary versus Dallas. Dallas has a higher recovery rate than Calgary does. It's one example. When from the oil and gas sector, when you think about Ottawa versus Washington, Ottawa's at the bottom of the list, whereas Washington's right in the middle of the list overall. Yeah. So when you start contemplating recovery, and why is one different from the other? Why is there that change? And I think overall in Canada, we've recovered a little bit more slowly than the US. So I think that's an interesting observation. So that's one factor. And then the second factor would be the type of industry. So white collar workers, for the most part, as we work with our clients, whether they're financial or professional services or some of the others, those folks can largely go home. We can work from home and we're quite fine. Thank you very much. And then when you ask, there's been tons of surveys done on that population, say, when would you like to go back to the office? How would you like to go back to the office? And so the yes and question in all of this is that 85% of, 200,000 people surveyed around the globe only want to go back 2, 3, or 4, maybe 4 days a week. Nobody wants to go back to the same old, 9 to 5, sit in a cube farm, process paper. And so what this is really telling us is that the return to office is going to be a slow return to office. But my view is that when we do go back, it's going to be absolutely a hybrid work style, because in this war for talent, we've gone through the largest change management activity globally. We all recognize that I don't need to be downtown and commute and all the pain attached to that. I've got to get dressed up. I've got to sit on public transit. I've got to do all these things versus just going down the hall or around the corner, and I can be much more productive. In fact, there's many companies that have shown productivity gains. So the whole future of becomes the pressing question: what is the world going to look like in 2 years from now, 5 years from now? And what does that mean for our downtowns? And I think that is part of the conversation. And certainly the index really allows us to monitor that, certainly in the 23 cities, if not the global cities that we look at.
It's interesting, some of the points you bring up, right? Because it's the impact is like a domino effect in everything, right? And you bring up transit, and it's funny because I remember, I don't know, it was about a year ago, I was downtown, and one of my observations was, why are we running all these buses and trains like on regular schedules when there's nobody taking them, right? And then, of course, the housing, right, thing. A lot of people, because downtowns were flourishing with jobs, office jobs, people got apartments and condos, et cetera, right in the core or in the inner city, so to speak. So all this really has like a domino effect, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So you think about how it affects our society, the way we live, downtown versus suburban versus tertiary locations. Why wouldn't I live in Banff and work downtown Calgary? Like that would be a natural, like, why not? What is the art of the possible? So I think the
Yeah.
patterns of settlement will change around this. And so that's literally what certainly Canadian companies and Canadian organizations are grappling with. What does that return to office look like? And I think at the end of the day, most have landed on the place of culture. How do I create and sustain my culture? And it maybe doesn't mean that my folks have to be in the office 5 days a week glued to their desks, but I would have them 2-3 days a week and adopt this hybrid work style. And so I think you're seeing, obviously one size does not fit all, and every company will take their own version to it. But certainly our return to office vitality index helps us to monitor that across the markets, which is why it's such an incredible tool.
Fascinating. Thanks very much, both of you, for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Our pleasure.
All right, that was Sheila Botting, who is President of Professional Services for the Americas, and Craig Leibowitz, who is the Executive Director for Innovation and Insights for Avison Young. This has been Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business, brought to you by MegaPixx Media. Thanks for joining us.